Okay, let's call the meeting back to order and hear from Ashley regarding our update and recommendations from the SBOE Stakeholder Design Committee.
Well, good afternoon, guys. I have a couple of points of update, and I'm going to try to walk you through this in a streamlined way as much as possible. There's a lot here. So the first thing I'd like to start with is the Indiana Educator Evaluation Vision, Belief Statements, and Theory of Action one-pager. The committee received a draft of this in the April meeting as the Stakeholder Design Committee was still working on it, simply so you could see a progress update. The Stakeholder Design Committee of the board has formally approved this vision, belief statements, and theory of action. This is their work. And the point of this project, one came out of TNTP's recommendations, but was a recognized deficit by the members of this design committee, which is made up about 20 different folks, from higher education to school administrators to teachers to superintendents, other organizations like Sandy and Hardy from INTAS. And the point of developing the vision, belief statements, and theory of action is because we don't have one, and it's not directed specifically to teacher evaluation, it's all educator evaluation. So this vision is to establish the big picture of what we in Indiana believe educator evaluation is about, along with the belief statements of what it looks like and what it sounds like. So this is ready for your guys' approval today, and if you approve of this, then we'll take it to the board for a full vote to adopt this. Once the board fully adopts it, we will build this into the strategic plan so that it's communicated there. This is also something that Sarah Peace has worked very closely with us. She's on the design committee over the course of time, and we've talked about streamlining communication efforts for not only the board sharing this out, but also the Department of Education. And then Sandy and Hardy in their online modules that they're creating for the teachers and the administrators will also build in the vision so that it starts to be communicated widely and that we all start to get on the same page about what we believe educator evaluation really is about, which is supporting and growing educators, not just teachers, but administrators as well. So this is for your...
Has left the conference.
Thank you, Corey. So this is for you guys to approve today, but because it leads into the next few updates, I just wanted to flag that this is ready. The design committee is very proud of this. I think it's fair to say that they had a knockdown, drag out with words and determining what beliefs and how the beliefs sound, what the theories of actions are. So this is representing about 4 months of work of the design committee. And it's intentionally short because we want people to be able to internalize it easily and communicate it easily. So that's the first part of the update.
Actually, just a quick question.
Yes.
Actually, I was very impressed with this, but under in order to be fair and accurate, it talks about inter-array reliability, and it will be conducted within districts. Who's going to do that?
So I
How will
can
that be
speak
done?
to inter-array reliability in districts.
How will that be done? Who's going to conduct that type of reliability study?
So it looks different district to district. So primarily where we see this happen, if a school district has an online platform like Standard for Success, where they house all their education evaluation stuff, information, they can see on that online platform where there are concerns about inter-rater reliability. So they can see which administrators are maybe inflating ratings for checking for understanding versus where administrators seem to really be dinging teachers on asking higher order questions. Within the online platform, and Gordon, you may recall, Standard for Success came to share what that looked like, specifically around inter-rater reliability in March or August for the Strategic Planning Committee. I can't remember when exactly. But the online platforms for educator evaluation largely track that now. That information isn't always used in the best way, though. So part of Sandy and Hardy's more advanced trainings will be looking at inter-rater reliability and on-the-ground work that Sandy and Hardy will do with high-performing districts, for example, or those districts to receive recognition. They're looking at inter-rater reliability to ensure that there isn't inflation in particular areas, that they're consistently normed, and that they have ways of doing ongoing norming. What we often see is, you as an administrator receive your training once and you're done, you're a pro, and you don't have any sort of follow-up coaching to make sure that you're consistently normed through the course of the school year and then through the course of your career. So that is something that will be looked at in the auditing process. It's something that's looked at with on-site monitoring as well. But one, that data lives in the online platforms. It's something that within Sandy and Hardy's work, they'll be looking at particularly around district recognition and professional development. And then also the department with their supports for professional development are looking at inter-rater reliability. Does that answer your question? If it doesn't, that's okay.
No, it does. I was just curious as to how that's going to be handled, and then really, I was interested in how we're looking at that. Whether it's, you point out that we're looking at data coming from this evaluation, this school versus this school. And I'm also interested in what it looks like getting reliable, consistent results when different people are looking at the same thing. Yeah. Right, and that's the way that was through my lens. I was looking at inter-rater reliability, saying, if we go in and there are 5 of us as principals, and we go in to observe a teacher with the same instrument, same observation, are we getting reliable, consistent results from each of those individuals? And that practice, the time to do that, is going to be very critical in terms of the
ongoing PD.
The big piece with the data crunching is what you lould look at a district level or multiple districts to see if the ratings are skewed in any one direction or the other. Because if you could argue that generally speaking, quality of teaching is fairly evenly distributed across the district, you shouldn't see wide variance in how the ratings are rating different things.
David, please.
That's a different
Has joined the conference.
Looking at the inter-rater reliability. What we were after is to make sure the teachers, the districts continue to develop their evaluators through the kind of process that you're talking about.
Okay.
If I could add to my vision.
Would you mind stepping up to the microphone? Thank you.
The other thing I would add to Hardy's comment is that the other part of that work, in our opinion, comes with rubric fluency. So as you know, you and I could look at a rubric in domain 1.2 and highly effective language, and you and I could say, it looks like this, and Gordon, you'd say, no, it looks like this. So part of that reliability comes from the conversations that people have in a district that says, so what does this look like? And are we all have shared meaning on the rubric language? It's kind of like the first step before you step out and say, okay, now I'm going to use this rubric to observe and evaluate a teacher. And when we've worked with evaluators, the most powerful conversations, when they realize that they all have rated the same video or the same teacher differently, is the conversations about the rubric and the fluency they have around that.
And there's an important piece here, is that when people are looking at inter-rater reliability, no one has really talked about it in terms, what's the impact if the teacher understands the expectations? And one of the things we're talking about doing is making sure that teachers get some training in all of this too. So if I'm an evaluator and you're my teacher and we have a conversation about what's expected, then it's going to be easier for you to see what it is that I intend to, for the evaluator to see what I intend to evaluate you on. So those kinds of aspects of this process, that's what Ashley's describing here, and that'll be incorporated into the rollout and implementation.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the vision document?
David, did you have any questions about the vision document?
Yes, I do have an important question from my perspective. It's a conceptual, foundational issue. And in particular, it's under the section titled Acceptable Types of Objective Measures. And I was knocked offline for a few minutes, so I may have missed this, but here's my question and my caution, that it's really important that we have a fair and reliable system that produces data that can be used by educators to improve their practice. And so specifically, the objective measures that are listed there seem to go on and on and on and on and on. And my concern is, at what point does the indicators generate data that is then diluted? And so, for example, I see some information on there about parent surveys, student surveys, community surveys, and also some indicators dealing with school-wide data. And from my perspective, we're dealing with an individual educator, not the entire system. So again, my concern is that we're diluting it with so many indicators that the data that it will generate will not be valid and reliable. So if you go down right below that where it says categories, and category 1 is student learning growth, I have no problem with that being an indicator. That makes sense to me. Number 2 is student learning achievement data. And again, that's okay. And of course, we need to delineate what that means and what specific indicators we'll be looking at. But for me, number 3, climate and culture. Yes, that's really important to an effective school. And there's no way that a school would be effective without dealing with that. But I'm seriously questioning whether or not that should be a factor that should be included in an educator evaluation. And again, I think it just dilutes the data and may mislead people either in a positive way or potentially in a negative way. So teachers who are in a D or an F school or maybe even a C school, that might be a detriment to their educator effectiveness rating because of factors that are beyond their control. So I would ask Ashley maybe to bring that back to the committee and have them just take a second look at that with my perceptions shared with them. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And Dr. Freitas, thank you for bringing that to my attention. We were not quite there yet for me to be able to give context as to how the committee actually got there. We were actually just reviewing the vision first, and then we were going to review the educator survey results from the May survey. Dr. Freitas, would you be okay if I parking lot your question and concern for about 5 minutes so I can address it, but first review the educator survey results because that provides some context too?
Did you catch that, David?
And I sort of heard that response, but not entirely.
Okay, so what Ashley was saying was right now we were considering the vision statement portion, and she is going to jump to the
educator survey results.
the educator survey results next, which is will address your point, and she's going to put your comment just on hold for a few minutes and then address it with some context in what she's about to cover.
Absolutely.
Does that make
Perfect.
sense?
I didn't realize you were going section by section. That's
Yep.
fine.
So Ashley, before we do that, do you need the committee to formally approve the vision statement and belief statement and theory of action?
Yes, there's also another recommendation that's coming from the report. So if you want to hold and we can do both of them at the same time to determine if we move them forward to the board for August 5th, we can do that. Or you can do the vision now.
Why don't we just knock out the vision since we just discussed it?
Chairman?
Go ahead, David.
I have a comment. I'm concerned that we're approving this important committee work piecemeal, and none of us have seen the final document. And my concern is that as we proceed in looking at additional iterations of what the committee does, we may decide to go back to the vision and modify it in some way. So I'm just a little nervous that if it's approved, then it's approved, and somehow we don't get it back again to reconsider. I would suggest that a better process would be to give it our less than a full approval, but just say consensus-wise we're on board, or conceptually we're on board. But I don't feel comfortable voting for it yet until I see a full document.
So the committee's work has been broken up into pieces. So the vision, belief statements, and theory of action was the first objective. The second objective was looking at objective measures, which is the report and memo that I'll share with you in just a second. The next part of the committee's work, which actually starts on Tuesday, is looking at the development of a communication plan to support the vision, belief statements, and theories of action, and the resources to help enable LEAs to execute this kind of big vision, which of course can be modified to be more detailed at the LEA level. So we risk not moving the vision and not moving the vision, belief statements, and theory of action forward. We risk the committee not being able to develop their communication plan, which has been part of their work, and the resource what do you want to call it, the resource dashboard for being able to allow and provide LEAs the opportunity to execute and align with the vision. So I certainly understand the concern. I feel like I'm in a little bit of a pickle with the design committee though, because their next meeting is on Tuesday and they're digging into the training, resources, and communications. And without this being their guiding light, you know, they worked on this for 4 months, it would make it difficult to be able to move forward in that work. Because we are aligning all these pieces, but you guys are seeing approval as they finalize each of these components.
I mean, does it make sense though if you have a consensus here that this is appropriate, move forward? You know, it also gives you flexibility over time if you need to make any kind of modifications to this, then it comes back for full approval all at once.
Okay.
I mean, I'm asking as a question, does that slow you down?
Do you need, and let me tag team off that, is does this need to be considered on and voted on by the full board, or is it something that can be a discussion item? Here's the status under our strategic plan or strategic committee update.
I think we certainly could do that with the understanding that Sandy and Hardy's trainings are moving forward with this vision and that the design committee is moving forward in their work with this vision. I believe it can be, if it were voted on formally, it could be amended at any point, similar to the strategic plan. When we see areas of improvement, you know, the board can update with a vote. If the committee wants to give the green light and just allow us to move forward, we can put it on strategic planning committee update at the board meeting, and you guys can discuss it there too in the work that's being done. I would personally be okay with that, but still knowing that the design committee is moving forward with their work with this document.
I tend to agree with Dr. Freitas that I think just giving the green light to move forward. I think when I read this, I think it's very appropriate, you know. But I think to come back and say this is the plan, here it is. But getting the green light on the vision and the theory of action, and then come back when everything is done.
Okay.
Yeah, then we're not caveating it with we may change it in the future, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I agree. I'm comfortable with this. I think it's fine if we just, you know, note for the record in the minutes that, you know, the committee reviewed and considered and heard, you know, heard the overview and background on the what the stakeholder design committee is recommending in terms of its vision statement and belief statements and theories of action, and that we, you know, approve and you know, support moving forward with the process. You know, unless I hear any objections, I think that's kind of what the consensus of what we're discussing right now.
I agree with that. And one of the things that I want to make sure the committee doesn't see that in a negative way either. I think the committee is getting the support of this group, and, you know, go to work. And I think it's going to be a very important work moving forward. So,
David, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I totally agree. I'll go with the will of the committee, but as I hear it, there will be an opportunity once the full package is presented to go back and make modifications through amendments. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And this
Perfect. I'm fine with that.
Okay, and for timeline's sake, the package of deliverables, the package of recommendations from the committee will be available in the full board September meeting. Before that, though, the committee will review and will take the whole digest of recommendations and thoughts, the vision document and all of that for board approval at that point. So once everything is together.
Great. And we know there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into creating this, and we're, you know, I think sitting here today, it looks great to me, and I'm pleased with it. And I'd say just keep moving forward.
Okay. All right, so the second update is around the educator survey that the board put out in the spring. For a little bit of context, in the fall, the board put out a survey to educators really to get their understanding and their level of satisfaction with the educator evaluation systems in the state. There were about 2,700 respondents in the fall survey. In the spring survey, we had about 640 respondents. we want to be mindful that the survey went out at a time where schools are testing, teachers and administrators are busy. But of the survey responses that we did get, we were able to pull out a number of different things. And in terms of, you guys received the full report and the executive summary. So I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but I do want to call out a couple of points because it aligns to the design committee and the work that they're doing. And the design committee also in their last meeting reviewed this survey in detail to try to wrap their heads around what we're seeing. We're seeing some contradictory responses from educators, really trying to figure out what kinds of training and resources need to be made available to the field. And this is something that the design committee has already started to flesh out. But you guys hadn't seen the survey results yet, so a couple of highlights. The big takeaways from the educators is that the educator evaluation system needs improved support, especially in areas of communication, training, and resources. And the communication part was very interesting to us as we got into the weeds of the survey, because something that we identified was from the educator responses, there seems to be a misunderstanding about the purpose of educator evaluation in the state. The purpose that was identified to these educators is to comply with state law, not to grow teachers, not to make us all better in our practice. And what we wanted to take away from that is, as the design committee was working through their vision at the time, is that this is largely about communications. And in the memo that I'll get into in just a second, part of that is communications around parts of the system, like objective measures. What exactly is that? There's a misunderstanding that we saw in the survey results about what objective measures were. The understanding from the respondents was objective measures were state tests. And while that may be a part, it's certainly not the comprehensive list of objective measures that are acceptable under the law. So, communication support and resources. Most of the survey respondents actually indicated that they feel they receive some support from their district around educator evaluation, but not enough. Most of the survey respondents actually identified themselves as teachers and that they had never received any formal training on their local evaluation model. Additionally, they were not part of the conversation in the development of their locally created evaluation system. So, as the stakeholder design committee was looking at this, we're seeing there needs to be some level of communication or recommendation to LEAs on including teachers in the evaluation development process, but also providing training to them so they understand what the expectation is as determined by the LEAs. So we have this training gap, and just for the sake of aligning a couple of different points here, in the fall educator survey, while we had a lot more respondents, we saw something very similar. So the board has had 2 surveys now of over 3,500 respondents who are saying the same exact thing. So the design committee is mindful of this as they're making their recommendation. They're mindful of the communication gap, the misunderstanding of the parts of the evaluation system and the evaluation system as a whole. And as the design committee moves into their communication and then training and resources development of their recommendations, they're keeping these survey responses in mind because we are hearing through the surveys, educators really ask for these things to be made available to them. So the design committee is taking on the heavy lift to really figure out how to do that with also maintaining local control on all of these points. So those were the big highlights of the survey. Again, really mirrored what we saw in the fall survey. But the misunderstanding of the system and system components and the misunderstanding of the purpose of evaluation raised a red flag for the design committee members. So again, they're working through how to rectify that and to make sure that the training and support and resources are provided at the same time. So we have provided, it's posted online for the public and then also for you all, the full report so you can get into the specific questions that were asked. In any survey that the board puts out to educators, maintain it as an anonymous survey, so we can't pull out specific district information, specific teacher information. We did in this survey ask for the educators' years of experience in their current role, so maybe they're a teacher leader or an administrator or classroom teacher, and that was identified. So you can see when you look at the appendix of the report kind of where these educators fell out in their responses. So it's very interesting. I know the design committee spent a lot of time on this. They actually had a half-day session to go through this last month, so very aware of it. Sandy and Hardy and Sarah can speak to that. We spent a lot of time on that, right, guys? But again, here for you guys to keep in mind, and also to help frame the memo that was provided with the additional recommendations from the design committee. So if there aren't specific questions about the survey at the moment, I'm going to move you guys into the memo I provided you with additional recommendations from the design committee.
Yep.
So the design committee in crafting these recommendations is, again, working from the vision that they've established. And keep in mind that as the design committee started this work, we shared with them the current statutory and regulatory requirements so that they understand some of the boundaries that we're operating within at the moment. And that they also reviewed the data that Sarah Peace from DOE provided us on the distribution of objective measures, from the objective measure percentages from the evaluation systems across the state. They also reviewed the survey responses from the spring survey of the board to gauge educators' perceptions, concerns, and then where they identify areas of improvement being for educator evaluation. And then they also bring to the design committee members also bring to the table their own personal experiences. So again, this committee is made up of superintendents, principals, teachers, organizations like Sandy and Hardy, higher education, and we have some retired superintendents who also sit on the committee who provide great perspective. We also have the School Board Association, the Principals Association, and the Superintendents Association represented on the committee as well. And the point, again, to be able to have global perspective as we're working on these things. So the first recommendation in this memo is identifying one of the objectives that the Strategic Planning Committee tasked the Design Committee with was really looking at objective measures. What does that mean? What does it look like across the state? What are we finding? And in the Design Committee's review of objective measures across the state, we saw the range of total objective measures from a total of 5% to 50%. And in working through that and having lively discussion, because again, we have a nice represented committee, the committee largely, the majority of the committee, sees the 20 to 40% range of all objective measures combined as an appropriate range. That is not their recommendation to you all, though. The recommendation of the committee is actually to conduct an audit of the past 4 years of evaluation in the state to really see what objective measures, specifically to Dr. Freitas's point, carry the most weight and value in a teacher evaluation system. This study has not been done in Indiana, and we see great value and would provide a sense of relief to the Stakeholder Design Committee to have that information. And since we have had a number of years of the evaluation system being implemented in Indiana, we have enough data now to really be able to engage in that audit. So their specific recommendation to you today is to move forward with this audit. We can make it an actual project of the Strategic Planning Committee and monitor the project over the course of time to figure out what is going on with objective measures locally. We see from the state level and then also from what the Design Committee has reviewed, this broad range. And while they are comfortable within a certain guardrails, the 20 to 40% range, where we still have questions is which objective measures carry the most weight. We know that student achievement has to be a part of that, but in the Design Committee's work also, they saw great value in adding culture and climate, specifically something like student surveys. That's a controllable factor for a teacher. And if a district right now wants to use scientifically valid student surveys as an objective measure in their evaluation system, they are able to do that. But because of the miscommunication and the lack of understanding around objective measures, folks at the local level do not understand that that's an option. So in the Design Committee's work, and actually as the Design Committee was working through this themselves, realized they didn't have a common understanding of what objective measures were. And if this group didn't, we certainly know the field doesn't. So the Design Committee actually laid out a definition of objective measures as they see it, also representing some of the gaps that we saw in the educator surveys. And that definition is 2 parts, and it's laid out for you in your memo. I won't read it verbatim for you. But it also, these two recommendations or these objective measure definitions actually encompass the vision, belief statements, and theory of action. So this is how we're starting to see all these pieces tied together.
Ashley, who keeps the data that would be audited?
The
Is that
large
all
majority of this data, it would not be the Department of Ed. So the Department of Ed has the district level data of the percentage of objective measures. So this audit would actually be reaching out to districts to see and get into what kinds of objective measures are they using? What do they look like? What do they sound like? How do they measure it? What weight does that actually play? And that is very nitty-gritty data, and it's not something collected by DOE.
Okay.
So this audit would basically be LEAs opting into this for the sake of figuring out how to streamline and make their system better with the support of an organization to audit.
How do you, in conducting that audit, how do you ensure, the highest level of response?
I think the big part is recognizing that this resource can be provided to help the district and to basically fill a capacity gap that districts have to do this work themselves. So with LEAs maybe not knowing the whole host of objective measures that can be used in evaluation, having someone come in and say, okay, here's what you have, here are what the options are, here's currently how your each individual objective measures weights. And then to also really figure out the climate and culture piece, maybe student surveys, scientifically valid student surveys being used there as an option to measure the things that we largely call intangible for teachers, their interactions with kids, the kids' perception of the teachers, loving skills, all of those components that we find hard to measure, which do help raise student achievement, which is why, according to the definition that we have laid out here, and then also it's within the boundaries of statute and reg, could be an option. So in terms of incentive, it's providing for LEAs to opt into this. It's providing the capacity that they may not have to do this themselves. It also helps provide them recommendations on how to do better. And the point is not to duplicate any system, but really to help them study themselves, because I recognize in my work, and then Sarah may be able to speak to this too, LEAs largely don't have the capacity or even sometimes the expertise to do that. So it'd be providing a great resource in my opinion. And then also being able to provide this information back to the stakeholder design committee to continue to work with their recommendations.
Who will conduct the audit?
I think there are plenty of vendors who could conduct the audit. We obviously want to hone in and figure out who would be the best fit for that. This does kind of fall in terms of all of the minutia that would be included here. It's outside of Sandy and Hardy's scope of work. We could figure out how to align to it, but to bring it on as a full project and recognizing all of the other things that Sandy and Hardy have going on, I'd be concerned about being able to manage all of it. But whoever the vendor would be would work closely with Sandy and Hardy, myself, and Sarah, simply so we don't cross wires and that we are moving things forward in a parallel way.
At our last meeting, we received data regarding compensation plans for school districts.
Mm-hmm.
And school districts had submitted information regarding, or at least going through their agreements, we were able to see how they allocated resources based on various factors.
Mm-hmm.
How will this, the evaluation process, align then with compensation models, or is that just left to a local district to decide?
It's largely, and Sarah actually works with this day to day, but it's largely left to the locals to decide. Sarah, if you want to tag in, please feel free. In terms of the design committee and how these things align, the design committee over the course of time continuously brings up compensation as an area to study. And as we have more evaluation information, it is on deck for the design committee to move into this study around compensation, particularly starting in September is in their work plan at the moment. But specifically about the compensation plans,
well, I'm just curious, when you look at, school grades, for instance, then you start to drill down. So you have a model that determines how a school was assessed with growth and student performance. And then you get down to compensation, where there are 2 or 3 or 4 factors that play into a compensation model. Then you get to a teacher evaluation model, and there are 3, 4, 5, 6, and perhaps different factors. And there seems to me some opportunity for alignment, right, with all of these systems.
Yes.
So what teachers are being evaluated on, I mean, however we compensate them, that's probably where they're going to spend their time and really focus attention. You know, so, but what you're saying is that what we're really doing here is saying here's a model, or here are models. Here's how school districts are using this, and then this local school district will have an opportunity to decide how they're going to align, correct? As opposed.
I'll also say in the state board strategic plan, I think it's 2.1.7. One of the things is correlating compensation plans with retention rates.
Yeah.
And so that's something that the department has looked at, and we have data around that, and we've disaggregated that as well. So that's something that from the strategic plan that we constantly are looking at as well. So I think that's kind of what you were asking about. So we've taken all the factors of compensation and the different ways that can be used that I presented on at the state board,
Yes.
and looked at the retention rate. So if a district has 90% retention rate, what factors are they using, and is that data telling us anything?
I think what I'm hearing too, Dr. Bertram, is we have a little bit of a systems mess, if I say it frankly. And we have a big system mess, and then we have messes within the individual systems, like evaluation, compensation. And this design committee particularly, we've gotten off in the weeds a couple times on compensation, and we recognize needing to be able to see the systems talk. And right now, there's not a clean way of doing that. And because we see them being so interconnected, I think that's something the design committee could certainly work to rectify, and figuring out how to maybe streamline those 2 parts of the systems together. Anyway, streamlining all the parts of the system could probably take us 20 years.
Well, but I think that's an important issue, because it's all systemic, right? It's about systems. You know, so you create incentives around certain things that drive certain behaviors that may be inconsistent with something else you're wanting to drive. And so how do we align? You know, for instance, if we say as part of your teacher evaluation, we're going to look at these 4 factors, whatever those factors are. Right? But then it's not connected to the compensation model, which may be looking at something else. And then your school performance is looking at something else. And I think that alignment is going to be very important. You know, so it's that everything's moving together as opposed to disparate, isolated strategies. You know, so but I think what I'm hearing is, you know, this provides information to a local school district. The local school district then can decide how they're going to align their systems, correct? So it may not be from a statewide perspective, but it's certainly at a local level. A local school district could say, here are the measures we're going to put in place for our compensation plan as well as our teacher evaluation plan, and they see alignment there. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what you're hearing. And in terms of what the design committee would tinker with here, would be being able to provide, while it would not be mandated, of course, some level of resource to help districts do that well. Maybe it's a 1-pager, maybe it's a 2-pager, maybe I'm oversimplifying the number of pages, but some sort of resource to be able to think about the systems talking instead of isolated systems. Does that help? Do you have other ideas?
Well, yes, but I'm interested to see how this progresses. It's not necessarily a criticism. It's really a broader question, because I'm just concerned that there's alignment with all the systems that we're putting in place. And so we can come back to it later, but.
So I will think on that also, and again, you know, these things are on deck for the stakeholder design committee as they move forward over the next couple of months. So as we really start to think about that, I'd love to reach out and share some preliminary ideas as it's brought to the design committee. So on the front end, we have your thinking to kind of work with, and kind of this vision that you're talking about.
Well, let me give you one example, just as you consider this moving forward. You know, when I look at like the acceptable type of objective measures, and I look at my teacher, parent, student, community surveys, are the surveys part of my compensation plan? Right? And they could be, or they may not be, right? So, but if I get my evaluation, and that's an area that I'm doing very well at. My students love me, parents are happy, all these things are happening, yet it doesn't matter on the compensation plan.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That conflict will create problems for us, I believe, or for schools, you know, because they're measured, we're saying these are important as part of your evaluation, yet they're not taken into consideration. The opposite of that's even more troubling, right? So it's not part of it. So the evaluation says in this area you're really ineffective. Yet on the compensation side, we meet all the measures for this, and we're saying we're compensating you here based on these measures, yet in these other areas on your evaluation we have real concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that disconnect could be problematic. So that's really, I think, the basis for my question and the challenge we have moving forward. So I'll look forward to hearing more as we move.
We will certainly take that feedback and really start to dig into that so that we can bring this forward with alignment and make sure that we're not leaving one system out when it really should all be working together, to your point. Okay, so you have the definition of objective measures of student learning, which were defined by the design committee here, which consisted of the belief statements, theories of action, and the vision. To Dr. Freitas's point, so Dr. Freitas, this will be your time to weigh in and really ask questions on this. The acceptable type of objective measures are all objective measures that the stakeholder design committee recognized within the boundaries of statute and reg as options for locals to decide that they want to use in their objective measures part of their evaluation. So one point of clarity, if, for example, my school district is using 30% objective measures, that may include my ISTEP results, that may include any interim assessments that I have for my students, it may include the student learning objectives of my students, it may also include a scientifically valid student survey. Those points combined equal that 30%. This is a point of clarity simply because it seems to not be understood that way in the field as represented in the survey results, but also as the design committee started their work. So one activity that the design committee did was, within the boundaries of statute and reg, list all of the objective measures that an LEA could potentially use. And we had like 4 chart papers full of options. And in flushing through those options, the committee realize as a whole that these really are the primary objective measures available to districts. What percentage that is up to, what percentage each of these could play into that is completely up to the locals. We do know that if the teacher is in a tested grade, that state assessment aligned to that tested grade has to have the most weight, even by 1%, of 1% higher than the other objective measures. So the committee kept all of this in mind while crafting this. The section below that list of bulleted acceptable objective measures was the design committee's recommendation of parts of the pie that we talk about in teacher evaluation. So within, and if I can speak with my hands for a second, so you have the entire pie of the summative teacher evaluation. You have the observation part of that, you have a small part of that that's A through F grade, and then the large majority on the other side is made up of objective measures. Within that part of objective measures, the design committee says there are really 3 important parts that should weigh into the objective measures: the learning growth of students, the learning achievement of students, and culture and climate. In a controllable way, within a culture, with culture and climate, a teacher's controllable factor. So again, this is up to the locals to decide exactly what that would actually be made up of. But we're looking at student learning, growth, and achievement, and part of the learning environment is the climate and culture. And this is something the design committee felt was important enough to call out here. So you'll see that reflected. Another small point that the design committee recommended for change is instead of calling the teacher evaluation rubric, and this comes to systems design down the line, instead of calling it the TER, rebranding or renaming to the educator evaluation rubric, to start establishing some alignment between expectations for teachers, expectations for administrators, and expectations for superintendents, which largely doesn't exist in our state right now. So again, as we're looking at these recommendations from the design committee, while part of it is teacher evaluation, because we're talking about the objective measures, they're also looking and working more globally at how that works for principals versus how that works for superintendents. This is a huge part of Sandy and Hardy's work as well. The design committee has just tinkered with and shared their feedback on that over the course of time. So you'll see that we call this the EER in the recommendations because the design committee feels the importance of making sure the language matches the expectation, which would be educator evaluation rating or rubric. So, any questions to this point? I'm sorry, this is dense. Lots of work has happened. We talked about the majority of the committee actually feeling comfortable with this 20 to 40% range. I just want to reiterate that the recommendation is actually to study further what's happened in Indiana with the different types of objective measures used across districts and really to conduct this audit. So my job for the design committee is to relay to you guys. So that's their specific recommendation. If you guys are comfortable with the recommendation, the committee would certainly appreciate the green light and being able to move forward and figure out what exactly that audit would look like, what's a time frame for it, who's best to do it, recognizing that there are some capacity limitations for Sandy and Hardy, or else we would throw everything at Sandy and Hardy if we could. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, so did you get to David's question?
Oh, so Dr. Freitas, you'd mentioned the climate and culture piece and including components within the teacher's summative evaluation that are maybe outside of their control. And hopefully in giving the explanation that when we look at climate and culture, the point in the recommendation from the design committee was coming from a place of measuring the climate and culture in a way that it is a controllable factor for teachers, like a scientifically valid student survey. Did that help answer your question, or did I not cover it?
David, did you catch that?
I'm here. I was talking, but I had the mute on my phone. Sorry. I understand what you're saying, Ashley. I still have some conceptual concerns about it, about diluting accurate information. And although some other states may be doing it, doesn't mean it's right. And so I'm not saying we should change it at this point, but I would just like to explore it in more detail, maybe in conversations, and just take a second look at that. What I'm looking for is pure data of the educator effectiveness. And I'll use the example again. You could have exemplary teachers in D and F and C schools that, because of their school culture data or surveys, could really be a detriment to really good teachers. And so because of that example, which may be prevalent, I still have some concerns.
Dr. Freitas, I'll follow up with you so we can talk more in detail about that. Also so I can relay to the design committee.
So basically, next steps, Ashley, would be to start planning for an audit of objective measures.
Basically the last 4 years of evaluation in the state to really get a good sense of what objective measures call out the teacher performance better than others. We've got a wide variety of objective measures that are used in the state. because we are a local control state. But if we can find objective measures that seem to have more significance than others, then it's certainly worth looking into. And since we do have quite a bit of data at our disposal now, after folks have had, you know, a few years to adjust, seems like a good opportunity. It was something the design committee had consensus on and really felt was important to do.
So just to make sure we're all clear, we're not talking about the percentage of objective measures that are that go into the evaluations. We're talking about drilling down even further into what that percentage is, which we know we have data on. Department of Education keeps that. But we're talking about really drilling down into what school districts are using to make up that objective measures, the objective measures that go into these evaluations.
Correct. I'm sorry.
I saw some head shaking, nodding. Do you guys want to elaborate? I just want to make sure, like, big picture wise, we understand.
We try to be a team, and Ashley is our leader in this. And one of the things that we decided was that we believe out there's our best practices with what districts are doing in terms of that percentage. That you'll see similar percentages across the country. And when you ask people about why the percentage was chosen, because this is kind of an issue in working with teachers and others, no one can really explain to them why a particular percentage was chosen. And it boils down to this is what we can negotiate with our teachers so that people started the school year and felt like they were being treated fairly. In a world where we talk about database decisions that are related to student outcomes, that are related to school outcomes, there seems to be a way to carve out research questions to see if those percentages and if the array of objective measures are interrelated and whether or not there's some kind of an association with those particular outcomes. In order to fully research that question, we're going to have to talk with people about what are the capabilities of the different databases to see if those kinds of comparisons can be made. And that's a very sophisticated kind of analysis. So if the question is, if you weight objective measures in the district at 40%, do you end up with better outcomes than if it's weighted at 20%? Is an important question to ask. But you have to determine whether or not that question can actually be answered by the data that you have. The other piece of it is when you look at the audit of all of the particular measures that are being used across the state, are there some that are more clearly associated with desired school outcomes than others in terms of the evaluation process? So I would say Ashley's right about the audit being what is used. The other piece to it, though, is we want to be able to have information that says to us, this is the appropriate range. And this range is being recommended because we've seen if this range over time is associated with differences in the desired outcomes in our schools.
I just wonder too that depending on what goes into objective measures, maybe that would affect what percentage is used. So if you have a lower percentage, maybe it's more focused on simply the assessments. Maybe, maybe not. But I'm also curious about whether there's any correlation to percentage in relation to what goes into the what are objective measures.
When you look at the way objective measures is used here and as it flows out from the legislation, and I think this kind of gets at what Dr. Freitas was talking about to some extent. The research definition from an objective measure is very different from the applied definition and how they are represented and used in schools. So if you talk about a research definition, it really is a definition that's about an absence of human judgment. The score is what the score is, and the research has said what the score indicates. So humans only come in and they talk about the people come in, and they talk about the big picture of what the results mean. But they don't talk about, we don't validate whatever the construct is that's being measured. But as you get away from a pure objective measure. You get into other kinds of measures that qualify according to these applied definitions of how they're being used by schools. You get all the way down to rubrics. And people will talk about, as you move from the pure research definition, the validity and reliability coefficients of those measures change. So the farther you get away from that standardized test, and I know the standardized tests kind of have a bad name now, but it's really how they're used is what the real issue is. And the more you get down into teacher-made tests, which have a great deal of value in classrooms, but you start getting into student learning objectives and student growth measures, where you have people at the school and the classroom level that are developing measures that qualify as objective measures according to this law. They're very different than the kind of big standardized objective measures where people have looked at item development and normed them over time. So the point you're making is a good one, and I think it is something, it's a question worth researching during this audit.
Dr. Freitas, do you feel, do you have anything to add, or I know you obviously had a question relating to this, but I just want to make sure you've had your say.
Yes, thanks. I think I expressed my concern prior, and appreciate the good work that's being done, and looking forward to maybe try to resolve the issue that I raised in a constructive way.
So I think from a committee level, just having reviewed these recommendations, I don't know that our committee wants to necessarily have any comment officially about the range, but I think I would like to see the further exploration and into this, what's been done in the last 4 years as it relates to objective measures, and understand that better than what we have currently. I think that would be really helpful for us.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I don't know who made this statement prior, but on the committee, it was in relation to a systems approach to what we're trying to do, and I would certainly commend that comment. It seems that we're doing public policy by piecemeal, and it's a very dangerous precedent. And I know in the past few years as a board, we've talked about the notion of doing a systems approach to teacher recruitment, teacher retention, educator assessment, and a whole host of things. And it seems that we're going down the same path of piecemeal policy making, which is, of course, really dangerous. And so there has to be an alignment in the system between teacher compensation, the evaluation system, and so forth. So I hate to sort of put the brakes on everything we're doing because it is good work, but my concern is if we do it in piecemeal, we're going to have a bunch of public policy decisions that are misaligned, and then the results will not be what we want them to be. So at some point, not today, but I think we need to address that issue of the alignment or misalignment of public policy as we do it piecemeal. It may call for a different process, starting with our committee on how we view various things that we're trying to do. So first I want to commend my fellow board member who raised that issue, and secondly, just put out a call, Gordon, maybe we need to put that back on the agenda and try to figure out a process where we're approving public policy as a systems approach and not a piecemeal approach.
Do you have anything else to add?
I think it'd be interesting during the audit to juxtapose districts' evaluations with their compensation plans. It'd be interesting to see how, from a local perspective, they're aligning those two pieces. I think they're, I mean, in any compensation plan, however you're evaluating people is how that's how you're determining the reward. And if you have bonus plans, compensation plans, then you're looking at the evaluations and people are going to spend their time. It's kind of like we talk about in testing. Teachers are going to spend their time in areas that are tested, and areas that aren't tested aren't going to get as much time. It's the same. It's going to drive behaviors in the classroom. If those things are misaligned, we just have an issue. So if we can get that kind of information through the audit, I think it'd be very helpful.
We actually just did that audit, and we found that the corporations that have the highest retention rates do not use evaluation as a factor in their compensation model. So if they have over 90% retention rates, evaluation is not one of their factors. Usually it's education, experience, and leadership. So we do have that data. We'll be happy to provide information for you. But yeah, I completely agree. Artie, yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think where the committee was with this particular item was that before it made any kind of recommendation, the design committee to this committee to the board, it simply wanted to go out and see what questions could be answered regarding everything from weights to the kinds of objective measures that were being used, so that in fact it can operationalize and put in practice this idea of data-informed decisions. So I think that's kind of the nutshell of where the design committee landed with this issue. Just to explore and see what kinds of questions could be asked and answered of the data regarding the things that we're talking about here with compensation, the things we're talking about with ranges, the things we're talking about with the array of objective measures, on all of the kinds of school outcomes, so that it could step back a moment and say, let's see if our intuitions about what the appropriate range is can be supported by research that answers certain questions.
So basically what I'm hearing from the Stakeholder Design Committee is that you are looking to the Strategic Planning Committee to give you a green light to further explore what an audit would look like, how it should proceed,
Variables,
discuss it, come back to us with some further recommendations. But I think conceptually we would, and let the other committee members weigh in. But I think conceptually what I'm hearing is that our committee would be supportive of an audit that would help us understand what what a lot of these issues are relating to objective measures. So I would support that. I'd want to hear more about it and discuss it further. But
I support the recommendation as well.
David, does that sound good for you?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great.
One last thing, and I take 100% blame for this. I don't think that, and particularly to Dr. Freitas' point, I don't think that I framed the work of this design committee very well to you guys. It feels like we've worked on it in pieces over the course of time. Really, this design committee's work is they're tasked with multiple projects to work toward that big goal that you guys have to maximize human talent. Part of that is evaluation, part of that is compensation. And each of those are individual projects that we manage on the project charter. So while it does feel piecemealed, it is one direction that we're moving toward to maximize the human talent. And these are specific projects that have been identified. So how maybe I communicate it to you guys in a more robust way at one point with lots of information is feedback that I would love to hear from you guys. Because if it is confusing or hard to work with individual points at each meeting versus bringing it all to you and saying, here's what we have and here's how it looks in terms of a system, I'm happy to do whatever approach you guys prefer. But it's my fault for not making the big connection of, where this has come from and how it actually works day to day as a project of the project charter for the strategic plan. So I apologize for that. Certainly my fault.
And I want to reiterate, so that my comments weren't as a criticism at all. It was just really moving forward and looking at how we connect these things and really focus from a systems perspective. So it wasn't a criticism of the way you described it.
I know that. I'm just being a reflective practitioner realizing what I could have done better.
Yeah, I don't think an apology is needed.
I don't either, and I agree with that. Nor is it a criticism of the design committee. I think there's a lot of great work here.
Yeah.
And it's just moving forward of that convergence of all of these, I think, will be very important, so.
And I'm speaking out of turn. Ashley's been hard on herself than she used to be.
Yeah.
Because she conceptualized this from a system standpoint. She's simply reporting it out as different parts of that system are being accomplished. So she had a systems design.
Yeah, thank you.
That's the behind the scenes that nobody really ever sees.
So,
Thank you, Hardy.
Thank you.
So, are we ready to move on to the next item agenda?
Yep.
Okay. What did I say? Agenda item. Next agenda item is next steps. So we want to talk about future meetings of the committee. I think we had talked about every other month. So what are you thinking, Ashley?
Well, right now, you guys have, it's obviously July, and you guys have a meeting scheduled for August 20th. In terms of the different projects that are moving, we could scrap the August meeting to come back in September to have a more robust update for you guys. If you guys are wanting to know details or work through questions about the audit, I would prefer having the August meeting instead of waiting until September. But I'm going to leave this to you guys to decide if we're going to go every other month. You can meet again in September. I think in terms of days of the week, the September board meeting is August 16th or September 16th. That's usually the week you meet for strategic planning. So you can piggyback a meeting in September if you want, since it would align with the board meeting. You could do it a different week. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide, and we'll plan the logistics from there.
I think what I've heard from other committee members is, especially the ones coming from out of town, is that, piggybacking it on either the morning following or the afternoon before the meeting would be preferable. And, we're not talking about a half-day meeting either. So, I think it's a little more doable. So I'd prefer to piggyback it and just do it the 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 the day before, or 8:30, starting at 8:30 the next day.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Monthly?
Yes.
as one of two members on the committee who drives 3 hours to get to a committee meeting, and has other full-time obligations like everyone else on the board, we're awfully busy, that if we're asking for preferences, I would have a preference of having it after the board meeting on the next day. Part of that is a logistical issue, but secondly, there's issues sometimes that come up at a board meeting that we may want to tackle pretty immediately the next day. And so that would give us an opportunity to do that rather than meeting the day before.
Yeah, and I like that as well. One other thing, though, that, we talk about capacity and the work that's happening. Preparing for a board meeting takes a great deal of time. And with limited capacity and the work that's going on, I guess I question, would it be helpful for the Strategic Planning Committee to meet at this point every other month, let people go do work and then come back and still schedule the Strategic Planning Committee following the board meeting on the next morning, but then plan that every other month as opposed to monthly? That's just a recommendation.
I think every other month is what I've communicated before to Ashley. I think that makes a lot more sense. We had a pretty packed agenda earlier this year with the TNTP recommendations and the legislative recommendations that we were making to the full board. So we had a very full agenda. But I think at this point, it would probably make more sense to just do every other month. And if we can have it, immediately before, immediately after, I'm fine with your recommendation, David, to do it after the board meeting, the day following the board meeting. That would probably be preferable.
Okay.
So September.
All right, you've got it. I'll go ahead and I'll figure out, it'd be September 17th that morning. So if you need to block your calendar for now, and then I'll send out meeting invitations to you guys. There are a couple of other quick things in terms of next steps that I just wanted to put on your guys' radar. through the legislation this year, there was a data reporting committee that was established. It's being staffed by board staff, and Danielle Shockey from the Department of Education is chairing the committee. It's made up of different stakeholders. Dr. Bertram, you talked earlier about some of the burdens and capacity sucks that LEAs have, and we recognize that that's largely due to different kinds of reports that they're required to do. So the goal of the committee is to figure out how to put reports on a diet in the state, and if it's not required, is it something that we can get rid of? So their first meeting was last week. They'll meet monthly. They'll have a full report that will be made to the legislature and the governor this December, and they'll continue their work through to make their final report December of 2016. Additionally, from legislation this year, the board has been tasked with establishing a career pathways pilot program. And we've started the preliminary work to get that developed and off of the ground. It's something our team is very excited about. Dr. Bertram, you talked about different pathways and different abilities for teachers to basically move into leadership roles, and this is part of what the program is. And in looking at that, it's an entire system. So if I'm going to teach half day and I'm going to be a teacher mentor for half day, what does my evaluation look like? What does my compensation look like? That's all part of this work. So we will be bringing a more detailed update and memo to you guys on that at the August board meeting. But just know that's something that's very exciting. I think all of us that are practitioners, and Gordon, with your involvement in education, can be excited about. But those were two things that I just wanted to make you guys aware of.
Okay. And I just have one piece of breaking news. The Senate did just pass the
ESEA rewrite.
ESEA. So it's good news. Hopefully it'll go to conference committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I have one more brief item before you finish when you're ready.
Go ahead, David.
In the past day or so, there's been some confusion regarding the either increase or decrease in the percentage of people who are seeking licensure in Indiana. And I've been fielding a number of media inquiries. And what was in some media was inaccurate information, as I understand from our own board staff. And so I would ask that that our board staff move forward to obtain accurate information in regard to the number of people who are applying for teacher licenses in Indiana, and also to look at is it an increase or decrease from the past, let's say, 2 to 3 years. And I think it's important to get accurate information out there, and I believe staff working in collaboration with DOE could pretty much get at that information within a day or two. So I would ask that that you, Mr. Chairman, maybe the committee would support that request for Ashley and staff to move forward to obtain that information as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So let's give the information some context, and let's really understand if it's a 1 year blip or whether there's a trend or what have you. Let's just understand it more.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else?
No, thanks to everyone. And it's a great meeting. Thank you. Sharon, thank you.
Great. Well, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
We have a collective second. That's good.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed,
Aye.
no. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you.